So today on the Real Chat, we're joined by Joe Sanfelippo, a Wisconsin educator, former superintendent, and national voice on school culture and leadership. Joe is known for challenging the narrative around education, leading with authenticity, and reminding us that relationships and storytelling matter just as much as results. This conversation is about leadership, perseverance, and showing up with purpose, whether in schools or in life. So let's go ahead and get into it. So Joe, how you been?
I've been well.
I
I've
know
been
we
well.
just
All's good.
good, good. So I just want to tell you real quick. So by the way, Jimmy says hi. So I
Good.
we're
He
we're
always
kind of
Jimmy
going
always
back and
has something
forth.
to say, man. He always has something to say. Always
Got
good
to put
stuff from
himself
him.
in.
Yeah, all the time. All the time. He doesn't just let it go. He's got to make sure he's in there.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, he kind of reached out yesterday and I told him we had the interview today and he's like, "Oh yeah, yeah, you're going to love it. He's going to talk and crack jokes through the whole thing. So
No pressure at this point. Good. That's the way that it works. But yeah.
right. I love it. I love it. So your work emphasizes changing the narrative in schools, not just externally, but starting from within. What does changing a narrative actually look like in daily practice for educators and leaders who feel stuck in traditional school mindsets?
I think the first thing is you have to kind of start where you are. I think sometimes we have a preconceived notion of who we are as schools, and sometimes that can be bad, but other times it can be, I mean, positive or negative. Meaning, like sometimes I think we're, really struggling when we're not, but I also think there are times where we think we're much better than we are, right? So I think sometimes you have to know where you start to be able to build. And a
Mhm.
lot of times what ends up happening in schools, I think, is we end up being our own worst enemy in terms of changing the narrative because the way that we talk, nobody changes the way they talk about us until we change the way that we talk about us. So if all we do is change the way that we talk about school with the people inside the school, then we give everybody inside that school a better chance when they go outside that school to talk about what's going on inside that school.
Right. Okay. So what does that look like for you day to day when you were, still working directly
Mhm.
within the school as a principal, as an educator?
Yeah.
What made you want to make that jump?
Well, I think the first thing is that I think you find there are days where you got to actually manufacture the joy because there are days that just take you over. And if you're stuck in your office because of an email that you read at 8 o'clock in the morning and then it's 5 o'clock and you're still working through the semantics of that email and trying to figure it out, and you haven't had a chance to see any great stuff going on, then if that day happens once, okay. But when that day happens five, six, seven, 8 times in a row, or every other day it's like that, then you start to question whether or not you want to keep doing it. So one of the things that we talk to leaders about is, what are you doing to start your day and end your day? And is there any momentum that you can build on either side of those two components where you can feel better about the work that you're doing? So, like, if I tell people, think about the way that you start your day. What are the first 8 things that you do to get your day started? And if none of those things
Mm.
bring you joy, then you got to really adjust what's going on in those moments because otherwise you just keep going to the next thing, and that doesn't help anybody. So I think the big thing for me on a day-to-day basis was not walking past the great moments that were happening right in front of me to get to the next thing on the list. And that was really challenging for a while because I always was, I just want to get stuff done. And
Mhm.
sometimes in the eyes of getting it done, I walked past some of the great stuff that was going on around me.
Okay, so kind of spatial awareness, being aware of
Yeah.
what's going on within the school already, and how you can contribute to the change of that. You know,
Mhm.
uh, like you said, you want to get stuff done and get in and get out. And oftentimes when I hear Jimmy speak, I hear him talk about the teacher's perspective when 2-3 weeks into the school year, you're all gung ho and ready to
Mm.
go. And then a couple weeks later, it's like, yeah, I'm ready for the summer. I'm
Yeah,
just ready for
right.
summertime to come and get out of here. And I've had the opportunity to speak with a lot of teachers, uh,
Mm.
in my community, and I kind of get that impression from them.
Mhm.
I work at Piggly Wiggly, so I
Yeah.
often see them come in after work, and get to have a
Yeah.
little conversation with them and work with some of the students that are their students and they're bagging groceries for me or something. And so I get to hear both sides.
Right.
And I think that, the culture and the brand, are the core to the leadership, to the
Mhm.
philosophy. So how do you help school leaders cultivate a culture, of storytellers, or where every staff member, from teachers to support staff, feels empowered to share
Mhm.
positive stories about their work, to see these 8 things that mean something to them.
Mhm. So I think it's important for people to know and understand where they start and try to get some momentum. So you were mentioning that that everybody's gung ho at the beginning, and then all of a sudden, weeks into it, then the days kind of take you over. And I think people fall back to that average, to kind of getting in the groove because they don't feel like they're seen or heard or valued in those moments. And as leaders, I think we can help you know, push the gap between the beginning of the year where things are going really well to the, oh my gosh, what am I doing? By making sure that people feel seen and valued and heard. And one of the things that we've tried to do, or I tried to do when I was, in the superintendent role, was try to figure out a way where you could balance being in all of the spaces of the organization while not overwhelming, but also not making it be just like a wave as you walk by to get to the next thing. So there's a kind of a balance in that because I could get to everybody in our school every day if I wanted, but that meant that I wasn't going to spend any quality
Mm,
time with those people because I was just trying to get to everybody. Conversely, if I got to a third of the school and had great conversations with people and great connections, then the other two-thirds of the school, as long as I got to them and did the same thing at some point within the week or the 2 weeks or whatever time period, then they didn't feel as jealous. They didn't feel as like, why did they get that? Why we don't get that time, that kind of thing. So it's kind of a balance. But at the other end of the spectrum is true too, where you don't want to be so overwhelming where you're in spaces because you might have the time but they don't have the time because they're kind of crunched for their prep or their lunch or whatever. So
mm,
when you overwhelm them with trying to have conversations, then it doesn't work either. So there's a balance, I think, to doing that. And for me, the balance was actually writing it down. Where am I, where do I spend my days? And is that helping or hurting? Or am I spending my days in this wing of the building because it's convenient, because it's closer to my office? Or am I spending parts
mm.
of the day here because I could get there, on my way out the door to go out to recess or whatever the case may be? So I think just being cognizant of who you are in the moment is going to give you a much better indication of how you can help lead the people and create the culture that you want to create.
Okay. Okay. So having that authentic, uh how can I say it? So having that authentic appearance, showing them
Yeah.
that they're heard, that you are willing to spend that time with them, to help them grow. So in your experience, how has that transformed the way the culture has been in the schools that you participate in educating,
Yeah.
in the school system? So how does that work for you?
So I think the first thing is that it did a tremendous amount. in our building over the course of 13. So I was superintendent for 12 years in Wisconsin. And in our building, over the course of that time, we retained 89% of the teachers that we hired over the course of that time. And I think the big thing about that was they just felt valued. They could have all, like, a big number of them could have gone somewhere else to make more money. And um, because they're really good teachers. But I think when they felt that they are valued and
Right.
heard and felt like they have, more purpose with our group, and that wasn't me. That was that their group that they were in felt like they could get, momentum and feel good about being at work. And then they chose to stay. So when I work with other groups across the country, I think the biggest part is really finding ways as the leader to do this whole framework of recognize, acknowledge, extend. So recognize the great work that's happening right in front of you, acknowledge to the person that's doing it that they're doing great work and specifically what you saw that was great, and then extending it to one person who didn't see it.
Mhm.
And that one person could be somebody in the building. That one person could be somebody that they go home to. That person could be, if they have a student, if they have a son or a daughter in the school, making sure that that person knows that mom or dad is doing such a great job. So I think if you extend one story a day, everything changes your perspective. And I started doing that. And then I found a lot more joy in the work. But then the other thing that happened was that people started doing it as well. So I wasn't the only one extending the great stories. And that's kind of where things really took off for us, I think.
So building a better culture within the school itself, and kind of leading by example, putting that
Yeah.
positive energy into the school system, and it makes people want to stay. Like you said, they
Right.
could have went somewhere else, made more money, um, could have went on different adventures, but chose to stick around, with that type of culture. Um,
Yeah, and I think one of the things
that's
that's
big.
important about that is that one of the things that's really important that I kind of keep coming back to is that can't be dependent on one person. So if it was just me doing it, then it's just me doing it. And one of the things that we talked about with our group and I talked to leaders about is like, um, if you want people to lead, like you can't be the hero of their story. So you have to figure out ways that
Mm,
they can become the hero of the story. And a lot of times that means that you take an active role to start and then pull back and let them lead the way that they want to lead, within the frameworks of what you have. But a lot of times
mhm.
when you give them the opportunity to lead, they may not lead the way that you had intended at the beginning, but it ends up being better because they own the process to it.
Okay. All right. Well, so authenticity seems central to how you lead.
Absolutely.
So with so many pressures on educators, state mandates, community expectations, how can leaders maintain authenticity without feeling like they're just selling their school? You know, and I think you touched on that a little bit by helping them lead and become the hero of of the
Right.
story.
Yeah, I think the first thing is that if you don't, that's why we talked about at the beginning the in house to outside of the house, because if you espouse to be something as a school and like you tell everybody how great you are, but then the people inside are like, that's really not how it is. You've then lost all of your momentum and then nobody's going to trust you. So
Mm,
when you can take really, authentic stories that are happening that you can prove because they happened and other people know that they happened, then you get momentum. So the authenticity of what you do has to be the core value of the story that you tell because otherwise it's going to turn into, well, that's not really what it's like. He's just, selling something that ain't real. And there will be people on your team that don't, that for whatever reason don't believe that the story is authentic. And the thing about that is the people, if you do it the right way, they're the people that are, spouting out off about it not being like this, everybody in the building knows that they might be an outlier in that situation too. So it doesn't end up being too
Mhm.
much of a problem because you have the vast majority of people in terms of knowing and understanding the story. So when we talk about building the momentum, it's like all of the interactions that we have give us the chance to give us the almost like the latitude when people don't see the whole story. So they trust your silence when when you've given them the presence that they deserve in the moment. So the more that you're connected to them, then they'll trust the silence that they don't always get all the information for because of all the interactions that you've had with them prior to that, getting the story out there.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. A lot of
Yeah.
sense. So as I count, you produced 100 1 minute walk to work.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I've been following your journey, and I love the videos. And so is that part of how you can, show this culture to the teachers within, by doing these videos? Um, like, what role has vulnerability played in building trust with your audience? And what advice would you give to other leaders hesitant to be that open and consistent?
Yeah. That's a
Because
great
you've been very
question.
consistent with the videos.
Yeah, I tried to do one. I didn't do one every week because I didn't have anything to. They didn't have something to say every week, and I think and all the stories that came up were the 100 videos that you watched. I think I'm at like 120, but I stopped doing them for a year when I retired because I didn't want people to think I was still walking to work across the street to do the real work. So I gave it a year off, and then I kind of came back and did them. But during those 100 that I did in school, I was still a superintendent at the time. And I did it for a couple reasons. One, I wanted people to know the great things that were going on in our school. But two, I really wanted, all those stories had to be real because if they weren't real, I was going to get called out for it in school by somebody. So
Right.
knowing that they were coming from my heart, but they were also things that happened in school that that everybody understood, it couldn't be turned into, well, he's just making up a bunch of stuff that doesn't really work or whatever, because they were all real stories. So for 100 episodes, I guess they were all, you know real things that happen. And now the ones that I do are, you know, they're just they feel more philosophical because
Mm,
I'm not, in the school doing the work as much anymore. And even after doing the work for 26 years in a building and 12 as a superintendent, I still think that there's a gap that, when you're not actually doing the work, you have to make sure that you're acknowledging that and respecting the people that are doing it day to day and just try to help the people who are helping the people.
okay. Well, for the people that don't really understand what the difference is between being the principal of the school and a superintendent, but still being present within that same school system, what is the major difference?
So as a superintendent, you're in charge of essentially, well, you're a conduit to the board, which meant that you answer to a board of 5, 7, or 9 people that run the school district, and you're kind of the conduit between that board and the staff. So the financial pieces of it, the leadership pieces of it, curriculum, all of those things kind of fall under your purview depending on how big your school district is. My main job, I think, in that role as a superintendent was making sure that the leaders of each school, the principals of each school, and the directors and the directors, I should say, were all aligned to make sure that we weren't duplicating services, that we were still connecting, that we were inspiring people to do their best work,
Mhm.
and that I could kind of, be a deflector for some of the stuff that was happening from outside in, while still allowing them to do the work that they were doing. And that was, that takes. My secretary used to call me the hood ornament. So like I was a hood ornament on a car where you get all the gnats and all the stuff that kind of hits you in the face as you're going. But if the car crashes, like you're gonna, like you're done. Like you're the first one to get
Right.
destroyed. And that's kind of what happens with the superintendency. You're out in front, people see you because you're the superintendent, and you take all the little shots, but if something happens, that's it's on you.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's that's probably the major difference. But in a small school like we were at, I think I did a lot of principal responsibilities, and our principals did superintendent responsibilities just because we're all in one spot.
Right. Okay. Because yeah, because I kept hearing you mention, being in the same building, different
Yeah.
wings, things like that. And I know coming from Milwaukee, the superintendent had a whole different office. Like you had to
Right.
actually go to a whole different building, to even meet with this person. And I actually remember my mother taking me to the superintendent's office one time because I got kicked out of like every school in
Yeah.
Milwaukee. And
I
and
remember too.
so and Jimmy stood by me, the whole way. But
Yeah.
um, I I ended up going to the superintendent's office, and I remember my mom leaving me in the office because his last name was Jackson as well,
Okay.
and she left me in the office and said, "If you know better, you can raise them," And
Yeah.
she left and went out to the bus stop. And I just remember that because it was a whole different building,
I
and
bet.
I
I
felt like I
bet.
was going to court or something, to meet the
Yeah.
superintendent. So it was a big difference than the principal of my school.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
but that's
And I
why I
think
wanted to
it
clarify that
depends.
with some people because they think, like you said,
Yeah, it just depends on the
the
district and
superintendent's
how
out
the
there.
big the district, right, and how big the district is. So like, they would come, people would still come into my office for things that they didn't really want to come into my office for. It was a different part of the building and everything. It was away from everything else. But yeah, so I still had the conversations that I would have, that the conversation that went beyond the principal. So if things weren't going well in the school and we needed to do something else, then now it's my time to come in and have a conversation with the
Okay.
individual, with the family, whatever the case may be. And and those are, I honestly, I recently I was back in town, and I was having a conversation. I saw a guy who looked familiar, and but he came over to me and he said, "Hey, can I talk to you for a second?" And I hadn't been back in Fall Creek in a long time, so I was a little bit nervous. And he said, "You remember me?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." And then I remembered, that we had a problem with with his son, where we had to have a really difficult conversation about a situation. And um, he said, "I just want to thank you because here's what he's doing right now, and he's doing really, really well. And he wouldn't have done really, really well if we hadn't had that hard conversation, because the path that he was on was not going to put him in a spot where he currently is." And I know I probably didn't say the right things or at the right tone, but I just wanted to say thanks. And that was 2013, maybe. So we're talking about 13 years ago.
Oh,
I haven't seen the guy in 13 years. And
right.
then all of a sudden he just came up. And I think sometimes we forget that, um, we just want to do what's best for we got to do what's best for the school in terms of the decisions that we make. Sometimes those have an adverse effect on individuals that are making poor decisions. But if we, even in those tough decisions, if we can make sure that they know that we care about them, and I didn't even know that they knew that I cared about him, because I did. I just went about my business of
Right.
making sure that he felt valued. Um, but I didn't know about it until like over Christmas break this year, which is a long time. But so it was good. But at the
Okay.
same time, you don't know. You never know.
Right. And that's what, one thing I wanted to ask you, like, so when you talk about being present and given space for educators to be able to have that value, with
Mhm.
conversating with you, how do you what kind of advice would you give to bigger districts, where it
Mhm.
might not be as easy to sit down and have those conversations with certain educators, teachers, or staff?
Yeah, so I think the thing that when I work with districts that we work. My district was small, under 1,000 kids when I was a superintendent, but it's ironic that all of the values and the processes and the frameworks that I talk about to that I did there, they all
Hmm.
work in bigger school districts. So I was working with a school district in Texas with 75,000 students, another school district in Texas with 125,000 students, one in North Carolina that's got 80,000 students. It's all the same. It's just scale. And so,
Okay.
if you you have to be willing to be in the spaces that people are in. And if you're like, if they're always coming to my office, even in a one building situation, that's not working. So you got to figure out
Hmm.
ways to be in their spaces to make them feel comfortable in those spots and make sure that you recognize that they're doing great work in that spot. So it goes back to recognize, acknowledge, extend. That would be my one piece of advice: is see something, say something, and then say it to one more person. You see something, if somebody doing great things, say it to them, make sure that they know, and then say it to
Hmm.
one more person who didn't see that. And then
Okay.
it'll be amazing the amount of momentum that you get when you do that.
Okay. So yeah, you gotta hype your people up.
Yeah,
Keep
and
keep
it's
keep
got to be
hyping your
real
people.
though. The problem is it's not always real for people. Like they just say it to say it, and then all of a sudden nobody believes them anymore because they say it about everybody, and then they like,
Right.
but you know what I mean. So it's got to be real. It's got to be coming from an authentic place that that you're willing to know the people in those spots. And I did a really great job of it in some areas, and I did a really poor job of it in other areas. So, you know, the problem that I had was I didn't realize how bad I was at it in certain areas until it was too late. And when it was too late, then
Oh.
it was really hard to bring that group back. And I think a part of me had to realize that I didn't think I was going to get them back as much as I had hoped or wanted, but I can get them a little bit closer to back. And when I did that, it was really it turned out that trying to connect them to somebody else outside of me,
Mm.
but still be the connector, made the big difference because they may have not liked me at all in those moments. I may have had to make a difficult decision or whatever. And so they're already not, they don't like me. And that's okay. They don't have to. That's not the thing. I mean, but they have to like the system, they have to like the program, and they have to like the people. And so if I could connect them to somebody else who they could lean into, like I don't have to be, it doesn't have to be me. It's just got to be somebody on the
Right.
team.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, because that leads me into, because you've spoken about the importance of intentional conversations and leveraging interactions.
Yeah.
And that seems to be, something that you're very passionate about. So in your experience, what's one simple practice every principal or superintendent can adopt tomorrow to shift how their community perceives their school's impact?
Oh, that's easy. That's just to go back to, I've said it 3 times. It's like you go back to be in the moment to recognize the great stuff that's happening, acknowledge the person that's doing great stuff, and then tell one more person about it. That's it. Because if everybody does that, we had 150 people in our school, 150 adults. Let's say that everybody does that once a week. That's 150 stories every week that go outside of school. Right? Like
Okay.
that's 150 a week. Like that's think about that. That's 15 a day if you're doing it one time a day. What if everybody did it,
Right.
twice a week, 300 stories a week? I mean 60 all of a sudden you're talking about astronomical numbers. Like 30 if 150 a week, that's 30 a day. I'm sorry. And then all of a sudden you get to 300, that's 60 stories a day. Like
Right.
that's a lot of stories. If you're doing it twice a week, I mean,
Mm.
I'm not even asking them to do every day. If you do it twice a
Right.
week, I mean, that's literally 300 stories a week that weren't there before. And what can you do with
Okay.
300 new stories? And they don't have to be big social media jumps or whatever. Like they just need to be conversations. And that hopefully
Right.
will help people out.
Well, just sharing the good things that happen. So I wanted to ask you, what's some of the moments or one moment that you can think of that you think you really made an impact to a student?
Oh wow. That's really tough. I think, I honestly the story that I just told is probably the one. I had no idea about it, and that just made me feel good because that was a really tough situation. And at the same time, to know that they knew that I cared about their son, um,
Mm.
was a really big deal. But I think on a more of a granular, like on a more of a surface level, I think the idea that we told stories about our school that that we were telling stories about school before it became like the thing to do. And so when we did that, we got a lot more momentum for our staff. We got a lot more momentum for our students. And so I think the coolest thing for me, because I felt like I was super loud about that stuff, the coolest thing for me was when people would go on vacation or they would go some to another state or something like that, and they'd have their Fall Creek stuff on, their Go Cricket stuff on, the mascot and the
Okay.
whatever, and they would come back and they'd say, "Hey, I was in Montana, and somebody stopped me because they saw my shirt, and they said they heard about our school district." And so I think
Nice.
I kept coming back to that, like, as long as we can get the word out there, they walk a little bit taller, and that was kind of the mission the whole time.
Well, and I think that goes back to like hyping your people up. You got to
Yeah,
hype
for
your
sure.
people up and give them something that they want to represent.
Yeah.
Something positive, something good. And I can honestly say by following you and watching you and the events that you do, uh, a lot of people are listening, and it's
Yeah.
starting to catch on because this wasn't talked about years ago.
Right.
You didn't see teachers, getting together and creating a coalition to continue to change the culture versus just like you said, just doing the day to day. This is
Right.
my job. I'm going to tell everybody they're doing a good job, but are they really doing a good job? Do I really think they're doing a good job? you
Right.
know because I do the same thing. I see teachers come in and I'm like, oh, you guys are doing an amazing job over there,
Yeah.
and then I go home and I'm like, well, there's this problem, that problem, and they're not doing this right. And you know because
Yeah.
I actually been telling a lot of people about what it is you and Jimmy both do.
Yeah.
I try to get it into the school systems more because it's working. I've
Mhm.
been to a bunch of the events and I hear the different stories at the tables while everyone's talking. Um, and I deal with it with the school district here. I'm like, you guys really need to listen to these guys. Like, just let me come in there and play a
That's
YouTube
right.
video for you
Yeah,
real
right.
quick.
That's right.
You just need to hear these guys, and that's part of what you were saying by just telling one person and telling another, and then it
Yeah.
just spreads. So
Yeah. The more that
so
we
one
can
day we'll
do,
get you
the
back here
better.
close to
We'll
Fond du
definitely.
Lac.
That's right. I was in. Yeah, I'll get back there. I was there last year for something. I don't even remember what I was there for. Oh, I think a chamber of something, chamber of commerce or something like that. But yeah, I always get a chance to get back to Fond du Lac and get that pizza at Joe's Fox Hut, get the Kelly's Creamery ice cream. Man, I'll do it all, man. Gotta get there.
Definitely, definitely. So what are your next adventure since
Mm.
you said you're retired now? How long have you been retired out of the school system?
2 years. 2 years. This is my third year out. Third year out.
2 years?
Yeah, yeah. So 2 years.
Okay.
This is my yeah the
Nice.
third. This is my
So
third
and
year out.
and and pretty much okay. So just a lot of training and sharing that information with up and coming superintendents and educators.
Yeah, I do a lot of work with leadership teams and just trying to help people. I think the thing that every time I talk to groups, it's not and nothing that I talk about is a huge lift. And a lot of times it's just a realization that they're already doing really good stuff. They're just not talking about it. And that's the problem because then they end up being like in these little silos and nobody wants to talk about the good stuff because they're afraid of the response from their colleagues and nobody really wants, so I think part of my
Mm.
job has been to help empower, staff members to tell stories so it's not just dependent on one person. And then when everybody's telling them, then all of a sudden it changes the construct of the culture of the organization. So the more that I can do that for people, the better. And I'll just be as loud as I can and keep, pushing, and we'll go from there.
Well, I love and I respect that. And I say that because, like, I remember, a time where social media, the teachers and the educators would have been like, get off your phone.
Yeah.
Don't do that. And now it's more of a push to kind of get that message out there. Like you said, I had the opportunity to sit down with the mayor of Sheboygan,
Okay.
and sitting down with him and watching his videos, I can see how much he is just into the social media and getting the message out there, and how important it is to share with the community the good things that are going on.
Yeah.
The good things that are happening in his life. And every day, like, I post my motivational videos and then I see his videos,
Yeah.
and they're very similar, only he's on a political level, and here I am doing what I do, and you do it on an educational level.
Right.
And
Right.
I think it's all about, like you said, getting the message out there, being able to talk about it and having those conversations. Uh, and it's going to have a ripple effect.
Yeah.
Before you know it, everybody's paying attention to it. It's kind of like the movement with everyone getting back in shape and healthy, and mental health awareness, because it's becoming a really big thing. And before,
Mhm.
no one ever talked about it. And now it's just everybody's talking about it, and I think it's a beautiful thing. So,
I
but
agree. I
I
agree.
just want to say I couldn't wait to sit down and have this conversation with you, because I think for a lot of people out there that don't understand really what the superintendent's position is, or principal, and as a well, first of all, as an educator, you want to educate people, so you speak
Yeah.
on things that you know about. And I
Yeah.
always call it book smart. You read a
Yeah.
book, you learn, and then you want to share that information. But it seems like a lot of what you teach and what you preach is passion. it,
Mhm.
it comes, it's intrinsic. This is just something you do. So how do you relate that to your own family?
Mm.
Does it always, is it something you do all the way around, or is it I'm in superintendent mode or speaker mode, and now I'm in father husband mode?
Mhm. Yeah, that's sometimes it's hard to shut it down, and I think sometimes people will ask my wife, they're like, "Is he always like that? Is he always like super animated?" And she's like, "No, like he comes home, he crashes pretty hard, like it's over." But I think the big thing is just being present. If I can model what it looks like to be present with my family, and just like I try to model what it means to be present with the people that I'm leading, then I think there's a continuity that goes along with it. So I hope my kids, obviously know how much I care about them, but I hope we're trying to set them up for success in knowing that there's a certain way to treat people, and there's a certain way to serve, and there's a certain way to um, be authentic in terms of who you are, and everything else won't take care of itself, but everything else is a lot easier if you're present in the moment, if you're authentic, and you care about others and your willingness to serve.
I love that. Well, Joe, I want to say before we go, where can people find you if they want to get some of this information, upcoming events, or where they can come and learn more from you?
So if you go to jsanfelippo.com, that's JSANFELIPPO.com, you can pretty much find anything you need there. So I do a lot of events with schools, and most of it is during the beginning of the year. Welcome back to school stuff, which is almost full at this point. So hopefully we'll keep that going as long as we can, and try to help as many people as we can before they decide that it's done.
Nice. I love that. Well, Joe, I appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me today on the Real Chat podcast and give me a chance to know a little bit more about you and what you do. And I really appreciate the time we got to spend together. And this has been another episode of the Real Chat podcast. And again, Joe Sanfelippo, y'all check him out, Instagram, wherever you can find him. The knowledge is good and the power is there. So I appreciate you, brother. Thank you.
Thank you.